Rick Harrison entered the world in 1965 in Lexington, North Carolina, into a life that never stayed still long enough to feel settled. His father, Richard Benjamin Harrison, Jr., served in the U.S. Navy, a man shaped by discipline, routine, and the belief that hardship was something to endure rather than avoid. That belief defined Rick's earliest years. The family moved repeatedly due to military assignments, forcing him to restart childhood again and again in unfamiliar towns, schools, and neighborhoods. Just as friendships began to form, another relocation would erase them. Stability was not part of his vocabulary. At 8 years old, epilepsy entered his life, bringing unpredictable seizures that added fear and isolation to an already unsettled childhood. In an era when the condition was poorly understood, it often led to misunderstanding rather than support. Rick became a quiet observer of the world around him, learning early that consistency was rare and security even rarer. These combined forces shaped a child who would grow used to adapting rather than belonging, learning in the margins while formal schooling struggled to accommodate his health and constant relocations. Rick Harrison built his education in private and unstructured ways. Books became his anchor. He read anything he could access: history, economics, biographies, military strategy, often far beyond the expectations of his grade level. These were not assigned readings but self-directed attempts to understand how systems, power, and value worked. His epilepsy made concentration difficult at times, but it also pushed him toward long periods of quiet observation and reflection. Instead of relying on classrooms that changed with each move, he constructed his own intellectual continuity. He studied how people made decisions, how leaders rose and fell, and how value, whether financial or historical, was determined. This self-driven learning did not resemble traditional education, but it gave him a foundation built on curiosity and analysis. Without realizing it, he was training himself for a future where reading people and objects would matter more than academic credentials ever could. Las Vegas arrival and dropout decision by his teenage years. Rick's family had settled in Las Vegas, Nevada, a city built on ambition, risk, and illusion. The contrast between his unstable past and the city's constant motion felt oddly familiar. Las Vegas offered opportunity, but also distraction, and Rick quickly developed an awareness of both. School, however, no longer felt like a place where he could thrive. After years of disrupted education, he made the decision to leave formal schooling at 17. It was not framed as rebellion so much as resignation to a system that no longer matched his circumstances. Around this time, his father opened a small pawn shop, and Rick began working there. The transition from student to worker was immediate. There were no safety nets, only practical demands. He learned by handling transactions, observing customers, and understanding the unspoken rules of negotiation. The pawn shop replaced the classroom, and experience replaced instruction in shaping his next chapter. The pawn shop foundation with his father, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, began as a modest family operation on Las Vegas Boulevard, created by Rick's father with limited expectations and significant uncertainty. It was not glamorous or strategically positioned for fame. It was a practical business built to survive day to day. Rick joined his father behind the counter, where their roles gradually blended into a partnership defined by necessity rather than hierarchy. The environment was raw and unpredictable, filled with customers who often arrived in financial distress. Each item brought in carried both monetary value and personal history. Rick learned to evaluate both. The shop became a place where negotiation was constant, and trust was fragile but essential. His father's military discipline contrasted with Rick's developing analytical approach, but together they created a rhythm that kept the business alive. What began as a small pawn operation slowly became a training ground for understanding human behavior, value assessment, and survival in a competitive urban economy. Early struggles and lessons of the trade The early years of the pawn business were defined by financial uncertainty and long hours. Profit margins were inconsistent, and the shop often depended on unpredictable customer flow. Rick Harrison quickly learned that pawn work required more than buying and selling. It required judgment under pressure. Every transaction involved risk, whether in assessing authenticity, negotiating price, or determining resale value. Customers often arrived during personal crises, which meant business decisions were intertwined with human emotion. Rick developed a careful balance between empathy and calculation. He learned to identify items with hidden worth, from coins and jewelry to unusual collectibles, building a knowledge base through direct experience rather than formal training. Mistakes were costly, but necessary. Each error became a lesson in valuation and negotiation. Over time, the shop survived not because of stability, but because of adaptation. Rick's ability to observe patterns and learn from failures became one of the most important foundations of his later success. Marriage, fatherhood, and personal fractures during these early business years. Rick's personal life moved quickly. He married young and became a father to 2 sons, Corey and Adam. The responsibilities of family life arrived alongside the pressures of a struggling business, creating a constant tension between home and work. Pawn shop demanded long hours and emotional focus, leaving limited space for personal presence. As financial stress persisted, his marriage eventually ended, adding emotional strain to an already demanding period. Rick found himself navigating fatherhood while managing uncertainty on multiple fronts. He wanted to provide stability for his children, something he himself had rarely experienced, but the structure of his work made balance difficult. The separation from his first marriage marked a turning point, forcing him to confront the limits of time and attention. Even as he rebuilt aspects of his personal life later, the early fractures remained a quiet reminder of the cost that ambition and survival can impose on relationships. Crafting expertise and building reputation as years passed, Rick Harrison developed a reputation for deep knowledge and precise evaluation. His reading habits evolved into practical expertise, especially in areas like historical artifacts, currency, and collectibles. Customers began to see him not just as a pawnbroker, but as someone capable of understanding the broader significance of what they brought in. This trust was earned gradually, through consistent fairness and accuracy. He became skilled at identifying subtle details that indicated authenticity or value, and his negotiation style reflected both caution and confidence. The shop began attracting a wider range of clients, including collectors and specialists, expanding beyond immediate financial desperation. Rick's ability to combine historical knowledge with business instinct set him apart in a field often associated with quick transactions. Over time, the gold and silver pawn shop shifted from a survival-based operation into a recognized destination for unique and valuable items, laying the groundwork for broader attention. Survival through financial uncertainty despite growing expertise, the business remained vulnerable for years. Economic fluctuations, inconsistent inventory, and operational costs created ongoing pressure. Rick Harrison experienced periods where the future of the shop felt uncertain, and maintaining stability required constant adjustment. He refined systems for appraisal, pricing, and negotiation, aiming to reduce risk while maintaining opportunity. The shop's survival depended on discipline as much as intuition. Each day required balancing incoming items with available capital, ensuring that one poor decision would not jeopardize the entire operation. Through persistence, the business gradually stabilized, but the experience left a lasting impression on Rick's approach to risk. He became careful but not fearful, analytical but still willing to act decisively when necessary. This mindset allowed the shop to endure challenges that might have closed a less adaptable business. Survival was never guaranteed, It was maintained through continuous effort and calculated judgment. Reality television breakthrough in 2009, the gold and silver pawn shop entered an unexpected phase when a television concept evolved into what became Pawn Stars. The History Channel, not typically associated with reality-driven programming, documented the shop's daily operations. The show resonated widely because it presented real interactions, real negotiations, and real historical artifacts. Rick Harrison's natural communication style and expertise became central to the format. Audiences responded to the authenticity of the environment, where value was debated in real time rather than scripted. The shop transformed from a local business into a global point of interest. Visitors began arriving from across the world, and the family dynamic became familiar to millions of viewers. The success was not built on performance but on consistency. The same counter, the same negotiations, and the same principles that had existed long before cameras arrived. What had once been a small family operation became an international cultural reference point. Fame, pressure, and family dynamics. With fame came new pressures. The visibility of the show intensified both business and personal expectations. Rick Harrison found himself balancing television production, business management, and family relationships under public scrutiny. His father and son became part of the show's identity, creating a multi-generational dynamic that viewers connected with. However, the demands of filming and business expansion also created distance in private life. Fame amplified both success and strain, making every interaction partially visible to the outside world. Rick maintained his focus on the shop's operations, but the pace of life changed significantly. Decisions were no longer purely internal, they existed within a broader public narrative. While the show brought financial stability and recognition, it also reduced privacy and increased emotional exposure. Navigating this shift required constant adjustment, as the line between personal identity and public persona became increasingly blurred over time. Loss and the weight of grief. In 2018, Rick Harrison experienced the death of his father, a foundational figure in both his personal life and business. The loss marked the end of an era at the pawn shop. Years later, in 2024, he faced another devastating tragedy with the death of his son Adam. The loss, attributed to an accidental fentanyl overdose, brought a different kind of grief, one marked by helplessness and permanence. Unlike business challenges or public pressure, this was not something that could be negotiated or resolved. It reshaped his perspective on time, responsibility, and control. Public statements were brief, but the emotional impact extended far beyond words. The experience reinforced the limits of influence, even for someone accustomed to solving problems through knowledge and negotiation. Grief became a quiet but constant presence, altering how he moved through both public and private spaces, and changing the emotional tone of his daily life. Legacy, reflection, and what remains today. Rick Harrison remains behind the counter of the gold and silver pawn shop, still operating within the environment that shaped his life. The business continues, as does the television legacy, but his perspective has shifted with time and loss. Financial success and public recognition remain part of his story, but they no longer define its center. Instead, reflection on family, presence, and personal time has become more prominent. The shop stands as both a business and a record of decades of experience, adaptation, and endurance. What began as a survival effort evolved into a global phenomenon, but its meaning has changed for its founder. Rick's journey reflects the complexity of building something lasting while navigating personal cost. In the end, what remains is not only the empire visible to the world, but the quieter understanding that value is not always measured in money or recognition, but in what survives within a life fully lived.